All right, y'all. So former President Bill Clinton has broken his silence since Kamala Harris got elected. Remember, he was going around the country campaigning for her. He went to the Midwest. It was kind of a curious decision from the Kamala campaign because Bill Clinton is largely to blame for NAFTA passing, and that decimated working class people across this country, outsourced countless jobs. And so there's still a bunch of hatred and resentment and anger towards Bill Clinton among a bunch of the communities that he was directly sent to campaign in front of. So curious decision. But he said a lot of interesting things here. I think some people are actually misinterpreting some of the comments that he made, and we'll get to that. But let's watch and then we'll break it down.
Where is the Democratic Party going from here? Because Senator Bernie Sanders, who doesn't even belong to the Democratic Party.
What a cheap shot. What a cheap shot. Hey, Jonathan Capehart, I don't know if you got the memo, but you guys are toast. MSNBC is cooked. Morning Joe and Mika sold out to Trump, genuflected at his altar. The ratings have imploded across the board. And now you're taking a shot at one of the clearest voices on the left, which is ready to stand up and fight Trump and actually represent something and fight for working class people. He's not even a Democrat. He's not even a Democrat. God, we've heard this so many times, and it's such a insular, in your bubble argument, right? Looking down your nose. Like, please, he's not even a Democrat. All right, let's keep going.
Says that the party wasn't progressive enough. Do you see it that way?
No. No. I mean, look at not progressive enough. The infrastructure bill. There's 60,000, I think, projects underway. They'll soon be up to 100. And the CHIPS bill, they're all over America. And interestingly enough, both those bills, a majority of the investments have been in rural red areas. So no, I don't think, I think he means by that we should have been more against big corporations. And if you take a poll, you find people in both parties really do favor that. That's why we can always pass a vote on raising the minimum wage in a red state. Because blue-collar workers who distrust the government feel like those votes are something they can control. And they are skeptical of big corporations. On the other hand, the richest guy in America, maybe the world, Elon Musk, is up there listening on foreign phone calls with the president-elect, and they're not too concerned about it.
So when asked, hey, Bernie says we should go further left, do you agree with that? He says no. But then as you heard, he goes on to explain, well, I think what he means is we need to fight for stuff like a higher minimum wage and paid vacation time and stuff like that. Because whenever you have those direct votes, even in red states, it passes. As long as people are voting directly on the issue, they'll vote the right way. It's just that the Democratic Party brand is so tarnished that people don't want to vote for Democrats, even though they're voting for Democratic issues. Or at the very least, issues where Republicans are far more in disagreement with them than Democrats are, right? So, I mean, really, if anything, the biggest criticism is in the framing of the question, because he says, hey, Bernie says we should become more progressive. That's not really what Bernie said. Bernie didn't say we need to become more progressive. Bernie said we need to stand up to corporations and stand up to billionaires and actually represent working class people, and that's how we win. That was Bernie's argument. And as you saw, Bill Clinton agreed with that portion of the commentary, which, I don't know, it leads me to believe when he says, no, we shouldn't be more progressive, in his mind, he's thinking of the stuff he was warning Kamala about. There was a report that he said, hey, man, you got to answer these anti-trans attacks. They're saying you're in favor of men playing in women's sports and stuff like that. Don't let this stuff slide by. And Kamala was like, you know, we're not going to touch on that because that doesn't motivate voters. And to be fair, I actually think Kamala was right on that question. The idea that Kamala was too woke or too far left on social issues is nonsense. as I said, she didn't mention race. She didn't mention gender. She didn't mention trans people. She didn't mention Latinx or cancel culture or political correctness. She didn't do any of that. So you can't really blame Kamala being too woke for the loss. But I do think that is part of Bill Clinton's belief. I do think he thinks you were too far left on social issues. But that's just, again, there's zero indication of that. It's not what she ran on at all. It's not what she talked about at all. She really took a page from Obama's playbook for this campaign and just totally put to the side any questions of identity. And the only sort of social issues she ran on, it was more policy focused, like reproductive rights. And that's a social issue where it makes absolute perfect sense to run on that, right? So there was a lot of pushback over this clip and one other clip, which I'm about to show you in a second, of Bill Clinton. But to be fair, I think the biggest fail here is the framing of the question from Jonathan Capehart. He says, well, Bernie says we should become more progressive. What do you think? That's not really what Bernie said. Bernie said we need to take on billionaires, we need to take on corporations, and we need to represent working people better. Embrace the politics of division. Republicans have their boogeymen who they blame for all evils. It's immigrants and it's trans people and it's Hollywood. Democrats need their boogeymen because who we would point out is the enemy actually is the enemy. Immigrants are not your enemy. Trans people are not your enemy. Multinational corporations, billionaires, the top 1%, the big money donor class that rigged our government, they are actually objectively, empirically making your life worse. That's what Bernie Sanders said. That's what he meant. He didn't frame it as we need to become more progressive, because he's actually more astute than that, right? He understands that's not the framing that would work. In fact, I've always told you guys, as you advocate for these tried and true policies, universal health care, raising the minimum wage, the PRO Act, taxing the wealthy and redistributing, better social safety nets, as you argue for that, call it centrist. Because it does fall right in line with mainstream American opinion, right? It does fall right in line with that. So that was the first clip. Here's the second clip. You ready for this? This is the one that people are really going after him for. And it's more mixed than people are letting you believe. Here, let's listen.
In demonizing all establishments and all people who wear a tie like you and me to work and have a good education, we are breaking down the legitimacy of not only people who may be too sanctimonious and too set in their ways in the past, but also people who actually know things that are very important for us today and very important for our continued growth and prosperity and harmony.
So people are taking this and they're going after him because it's sort of portrayed on Twitter that this was still in response to that question about Bernie Sanders. It wasn't. I watched the whole interview. He was asked specifically about Trump. And again, one more time, this was his reaction when asked about Trump and Trumpism. Ready?
In demonizing all establishments and all people who wear a tie like you and me to work and have a good education, we are breaking down the legitimacy of not only people who may be too sanctimonious and too set in their ways in the past, but also people who actually know things that are very important for us today and very important for our continued growth and prosperity and harmony.
So in other words, that's a criticism. If that criticism was directed at Bernie Sanders, Bill Clinton would be 100% wrong. Because the people Bernie Sanders goes after are the oligarchs, are the plutocrats, are the people who've rigged our political system, are the experts whose expert opinions led to stuff like NAFTA and financial deregulation and the hollowing out of the American working class. So if this criticism was pointed at Bernie, Bill Clinton would be 100% wrong in that criticism. But again, you go watch the whole interview just like I did, and you'll find out very quickly. He was asked a question specifically about Trump, and this was his response. And this is a criticism of Trump, which is absolutely accurate. It's absolutely accurate. Because for Trump and his followers and Trumpism, there really is this notion that anything which comes from the mainstream, anything that comes from conventional experts, is by definition wrong, which is why you see things like the mainstreaming of anti-vaccine conspiracy theories, right? So as a criticism of Trump, it's correct. When economists say, hey, you can't do a 20% or 50% or 100% across the board tariff, it would destroy the U.S. economy, they are correct. When economists say, hey, you can't deport 10 or 20 million people without it destroying the economy, they are correct. So these are things you have to keep in mind. When Bernie criticizes the establishment, he's talking about the people who have objectively made lives for the American people worse. He's talking about, again, the ones who argued for outsourcing your jobs and deregulating Wall Street and endless wars. That's who Bernie is referring to when he shits on the establishment. When Trump shits on the establishment, it's very, very different. When Trump shits on the establishment, it's basically anybody who doesn't agree with me, anybody who has criticisms of me. That's the establishment Trump is against. Trump would view, the 91 criminal charges against him. He doesn't think, I committed crimes, so these people are just upholding the law. He thinks that's the establishment or the deep state wrongly coming after me. And Trump is wrong on that. So again, we need to be willing to distinguish and differentiate between when Bernie goes after the establishment, what does it mean? Versus when Trump goes after the establishment, what does it mean? Bernie Sanders is not anti-vaccine. A lot of Trump's followers are anti-vaccine. A lot of Trump's followers are anti-modern medicine, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Again, he was referring specifically, he was asked a question about Trump here. Now, overall, though, here's what I will say. We got to move beyond Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. We just have to. This has been their political party since the early 1990s. The Democrats have been their political project since the early 1990s. And it brought us Donald Trump twice. So there has to be some reflection. There has to be some looking in the mirror. There has to be some, what did we get wrong? And look, from a policy perspective, what they got wrong is actually very clear. Most of Bill Clinton's biggest accomplishments were literally right-wing ideas. Welfare reform and NAFTA and balancing the budget, right? These are right-wing ideas. And when you do right-wing economic policy and it hollows out the working class, they're going to turn on you. And that's what happened. So what is the path forward for Democrats? And this is something I don't think Bill Clinton would agree on this, but he should. But I've said it already. If the original Build Back Better bill passed, I think Kamala would have won that election. Because the original Build Back Better bill had paid family leave, child care, universal pre-K, free community college, expanding Medicare, higher minimum wage, lowering all prescription drug prices, not just some, and expanded child tax credit. That would have materially improved people's lives immediately, right? Now, he brings up good bills like the CHIPS Act, for example, and the infrastructure bill. Those are good bills, and the Democrats deserve credit for passing them. But those bills have more of a long-term effect, which, by the way, look out, because now Trump is going to take credit when a lot of these policies come to fruition and people get the material well-being. Trump's going to pretend like he delivered it. He didn't. This was from Biden. This was from the Democrats. This is the CHIPS Act. This is the infrastructure bill. So watch for that sleazy trick in a little bit. But if they did the original Build Back Better, it would have been immediate real-world impact right away. And I think what you would have seen is the same thing we saw during FDR's reign, which is American voters go, wow, these people really delivered for us. Let's keep voting for them. That's why FDR won the presidency 4 times. He had 80% of the House and 80% of the Senate at his peak. And so we need to move past the neoliberal era. I don't want to hear any more from Bill Clinton. I don't want to hear any more from Hillary Clinton. Because look, my fear is what these sorts of people are going to say, and many of them are already doing it, is, okay, look, the problem wasn't neoliberalism. The problem wasn't Democrats going right on economics. The problem is we're too extreme on social issues. We need to throw trans people under the bus more. We need to throw immigrants under the bus more. Kamala ran on a tough position with the border. She was a border hawk. Her response to Trump was, we actually tried to do a bill that would have cracked down on the border. You killed it for political reasons. And that didn't work. Why? You're never going to outright wing the Republicans on the border. Don't feed into their narrative. Again, their narrative is immigrants are the problem and trans people are the problem. Don't feed into that. Immigrants are not the problem. Trans people are not the problem. The problem is the multinational corporations and the corruption in our system where big money interests have rigged the government to help them and screw you. So I do think a lot of people's reaction to what Bill Clinton said here, it was kind of out of context because he was talking about Trump specifically when he was saying demonizing the establishments, right? And that's a fair criticism of Trump. It's not of Bernie, it is of Trump. So I do think people kind of took this out of context a little bit. But having said that, I still really don't want to hear from Bill Clinton anymore. I don't want to hear from Hillary Clinton anymore. I think you can even make a case that Obama as well. I think, believe it or not, I think David Brooks is correct. I think Jen Psaki is correct. I think the Pod Save Bros within the first couple days after Kamala lost, they were correct. Everybody was basically, yeah, maybe Bernie was right. Maybe we do need a politics of conflict and division and class war and going after the top 1% and unrigging the system and fighting for working class people. Because again, if that original Build Back Better bill passed, I think Kamala would be the president-elect right now. I do. And that is the simplest, most direct, most straightforward way to get your ideology across and get your solutions across, is to just say that. So in other words, the bulk of the blame probably goes to Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. And, you know, Bill Clinton's not as conservative as them, but he is kind of more in their camp ideologically. And this era of triangulation, this era of new Democrats, this era of we need to be more like the Republicans, it has to go. It has to go, and it has to go now. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.